have my sword. And you have my bow.
And my axe.
In the first part of our two-part Lord of the Rings series, we talked to VFX artist and Valve music composer Mike Moraski, who was the massive technical director on the trilogy, about his experiences working on set in New Zealand. Tonight we're looking at the trilogy from more of a story angle. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was an English writer who was born January 3rd, 1892, in the Orange Free State in South Africa, which would shortly be officially annexed by the British after the Second Boer War. His father was a British bank manager who had moved to South Africa with his family to Bloom to head his bank's office there. While on a visit to Birmingham, England to see his family with his mother, Tolkien's father died of rheumatic fever, and J.R.R., his younger brother and mother, stayed in Birmingham. When he was 12, his mother died of type 1 diabetes at 34 years old, 9 years before the discovery of insulin. Tolkien's mother left her 2 kids in the custody of a friend, Father Francis, and Tolkien began attending first King Edward School, then St. Philip's School. Tolkien spent a lot of time with his cousins, Mary and Marjorie Ingledon, who were interested, like he was, in languages. Mary and Marjorie had invented a new language called Animalic and taught it to him. They'd keep learning and inventing languages. In 1911, Tolkien took a summer trip to Switzerland, hiking across the mountains with 12 friends. This trip would form the basis of Tolkien's The Hobbit and Bilbo's trip across the Misty Mountains. From there, Tolkien began attending Exeter College in Oxford and studying English language and literature in 1913. He also got engaged that year to Edith Mary Bratt, who was also an orphan, and to the horror of Tolkien's church guardians, Protestant. In 1914, World War I started, but Tolkien surprised his friends and family by delaying his service until he finished his degree. In July 1916, the time was up, and the war was a meat grinder. Tolkien got on a train to France just in time for the Battle of the Somme, a 3 million soldier battle where British and French troops tried to hasten the defeat of the Germans. By October, he had contracted trench fever from a horde of lice and became too sick to fight. He was sent back to England, where he spent the rest of the war in and out of the hospital. After the war, Tolkien first got a job working on the Oxford Dictionary, the W's section. Then he was appointed as the Rawlinson and Bosworth Professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford with a fellowship at Pembroke College, a position he held from 1925 to 1945, a time where he began getting more into writing, publishing poems, then working on a translation of Beowulf, then finally being persuaded to publish The Hobbit in 1937. The Hobbit was a story that he had written for his children and was published by George Allen and Unwin to rave reviews. The success of The Hobbit was so great, publishers began pushing him to write a new Hobbit.
Yes, but to read into the book a kind of allegory of the H-bomb. What is said somewhere in the book is that the One Ring is a power so enormous that even if a good man were to use it against a bad, it would corrupt the good man.
But that is the thing which other people other people arrived at long before H-bomb was invented. Also, I may say that I began building the stories in which the Dark Lord when I was undergraduate. They were already in an advanced stage during the First War. The H-bomb hadn't been heard of.
If you were to be remembered as the man who has made the Lord of the Rings, would you rather be remembered as a man who has said something or as a man who has made something?
Starting slowly in 1937, interrupted by World War II, Tolkien worked away at a manuscript until 1949 in stops and starts. This was The Lord of the Rings, envisioned as a single 2-volume set paired with the Silmarillion. However, for economic reasons, The Lord of the Rings ended up being published in 1954 and 1955 in 3 volumes, 2 books per volume. Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King together, The Lord of the Rings became one of the best-selling novels ever written. And yet, The Lord of the Rings seemed next to impossible to turn into a film, didn't it? Ralph Bakshi and Saul Zaentz tried in 1978 with a rotoscoped adaptation of The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, shoved together into a 2-hour and 20-minute animated movie. Tolkien was dead by then, so we'll never know what he thought of that. Saul Zaentz kept the film rights until 1997, when the New Zealand director Peter Jackson convinced him to let him buy them. Peter Jackson had a deal with Harvey Weinstein at Miramax, after Peter and his life partner Fran wowed Hollywood with their 1996 blockbuster, The Frighteners. For $26 million, Peter was able to write and direct with Fran. He had his own New Zealand-based visual effects studio, Weta Digital. He was able to show Universal that he could work on a budget within a very tight schedule. At this point, Peter's dream was to adapt King Kong, However, that was put on hiatus after Godzilla and Mighty Joe Young came out first. Too many monster movies in one year. So Peter and Fran decided to create their own high fantasy screenplay with original characters. Only every single screenplay they wrote ended up being basically a version of Lord of the Rings. So they finally just decided it was time to adapt The Lord of the Rings. Only Harvey Weinstein began panicking about money, pushing Peter and Fran to adapt the trilogy into 2 films, each one under 3 hours. Then he decided the whole trilogy should be turned into 1 film. That's when they decided they'd had enough, and after months of arguing, Weinstein relented and put up the rights, which were bought up by New Line Cinema. Under the provision that Peter direct 3 films as long as he wanted, they wanted to do the trilogy right. Before Weinstein relented to selling the rights to New Line, he actually threatened to replace Peter Jackson with Quentin Tarantino, which kind of would have been hilarious. What the hell would that have looked like? The principal photography for the trilogy began October 11th, 1999, and ended December 22nd, 2000. From there, pickup shots were done every year from 2001 to 2004 to get anything they had missed. Most of the filming was done within New Zealand's national parks and conservation areas, as well as sound stages in Wellington and Queenstown. Post-production was also done pretty much consecutively, with each film getting a year before the next film was set to be released.
Tops has been like 500,000 feet of film. We're getting avid storage, we're getting 1.5 terabytes of storage set up and 6 avids hooked together. Okay. Just gearing up for the biggest thing any of us have ever seen.
The size of the project was quite amazing. The amount of footage that was turned over through the cutting room was nothing I'd ever seen before.
Normally we'd have a ratio of 12 or 15 to 1, but on this I think we end up about 150 to 1, so that's a lot of film.
Some stages we had like 7 and 8 units out shooting, all producing footage.
How many units have we got? I've lost count.
A big part of what made this entire thing, well, possible, but also so groundbreaking, was the extensive use of motion capture with weighted digital, advancing the technology farther than it ever had been before.
I hate you. I hate you. Where would you be without me? Ellen, I saved us.
Motion capture was most often used with characters like Gollum, who were on 2 legs and had motion that could be captured from the movements of an actor. One of the biggest innovations in animation and visual effects was the massive software package. Developed for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it allowed the generation of crowd sequences for battles.
The great thing with the technology that we devised over the years is that we were able to make continual improvements to it, and obviously the massive software that was written for Lord of the Rings was a good case, because we wrote this to enable us to have these computer-generated armies which would behave naturally and look natural and not look like they were replicated bits of computer programming.
The cast of all these films was huge, with each film adding entire populated areas of Middle-earth. By the time you have Return of the King, you have characters from the Shire, Rivendell, Lothlorien, Rohan, Gondor, Isengard, and of course Mordor. I'm not even going to try to recite the entire cast, but the main Fellowship members alone were Elijah Wood, Sean Ashton, Ian McKellen, Viggo Mortensen, Orlando Bloom, John Rhys-Davies, Sean Bean, Billy Boyd, and Dominic Moynihan. 4 hobbits, 2 men, an elf, a dwarf, and a wizard. The overall budget for all 3 films was $281 million. After Miramax bought the rights and Harvey Weinstein tried to push them all into one film, Peter Jackson pushed Weinstein into allowing another company, New Line, to buy it. $281 million is still an impressively small amount, considering the later Hobbit trilogy would cost $623 million. The films made $2.9 billion at the box office. Fellowship of the Ring came out in December 2001, The Two Towers December 2002, Return of the King December 2003. In 2004, The Return of the King swept the Oscars, taking home 11 awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Editing, Best Makeup, Best Original Score, Best Original Song, and Best Visual Effects.
Gun knuckles for 8! And Rohan will answer.